Okay, hi all, I'm Kastan. This is my third summer interning here at the Autonomy Incubator, and I'm going into my junior year at Swarthmore College, where I'm majoring in computer science. So here at NASA for the past couple years, I've been working on this in-space assembly project that has a lot to do with using cameras to find objects in a scene or an environment so that once we find those objects, we can use robots to pick them up and assemble these into larger structures. But that's kind of high level, so let's dive into this with a quick example. Our social media intern made this fantastic video. Hey, I'm Kastan. I'm a third summer intern here at the NASA Langley Research Center, and I'm working on a robotic in-space assembly project. So let's go talk about that right now. So, about that project. Basically, satellites are getting so big and expensive and complicated that we need to send them into space in multiple rockets. So what we do is we send them up in multiple rockets and then get them into the same orbit, zipping around the Earth. And then once they're next to each other, we want to use robots to assemble all of those pieces into one large structure. We need this for complicated satellites and for missions to Mars, where we're just going to need a lot of cargo going into orbit. So I work on the robots that do the assembly. More specifically, I use little cameras like these, which have 3D depth information, and we turn information like this into position data so we can find the objects that we're looking for in the world. Once we know where objects are, we're able to pick them up with our robots and assemble them into the final structure. So I work on turning camera information into position information so that our robots can actually do the assembly. That's all. And so last year I worked on this project where we used these little fiducial QR code looking markers in order to find the trusses. But in space, every ounce of mass counts. So we want to get rid of this parasitic mass and transition to using those 3D cameras to just find the truss based on its intrinsic shape. And so that's how we're getting rid of that parasitic mass and then having a more robust system overall to replace it. But this is only quarter scale and with different hardware than we're going to end up with in the finale. So let's go look at what full-size robotic operations actually look like.
We're just getting more started.
Okay, so those robotic arms that you just saw there, those are just temporary hardware. The real hardware is super cool. It's this 30-foot long crane that's custom built to fly into space to move all these things around, but that's classified. So we can't really show that. What we can show, however, is all of these beautiful trusses. These are the kind of trusses that we're going to be assembling in space. There are a bunch of different types, but these will be up there as kind of the structure of the satellite. You can put large mirrors on top of this and then create something akin to the Hubble telescope or the James Webb telescope by putting mirrors up there. But you can also actually cover the sides of these with control panels and sensor dashboards and stuff like that. And so these will actually house sensor suites on the outside of them as well. So we're developing other robotics that'll crawl across these structures and then pick and place sensor suites as we add to these large structures flying around in space. Really what we want to do is create large systems in space. And to do that, you're going to need infrastructure. And so to have that infrastructure in place, we need autonomous robotics. So that's why we do autonomous robotics. Let me walk out of frame again. Hey, well, thank you so much for watching. I just wanted to say before we go that NASA really does a lot of cool research and it's worth funding. Also, if you want to be an intern here at NASA at any of our research centers across the country, you just have to go to intern.nasa.gov to apply. I applied when I was in high school and I got the job, and it's been one of the most transformative experiences of my life. So thank you so much to the NASA research centers across the country. My name's been Kastan. Go to space. Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully now you have a better sense of the context of the mission. We're doing in-space assembly and working on the robotics for that. So, oh, not again. Okay. Last year worked on these fiducial markers. They have a lot of weight to them, and additionally they require a lot of additional engineering. You have to find a place to put them on your structure. Maybe you can engrave it into the structure itself. It's a lot of additional engineering. So we're going to move away from that and try and find these trusses based on their intrinsic shape. And so we're using 3D cameras to do that. These 3D cameras are actually pretty interesting. So they use a combination of methods to get the depth info. They actually have a stereoscopic vision system, so they have two RGB cameras, and they use the difference there, just like the human eyes, to get depth. But they also have an IR dot projector, just like the iPhone X projects dots. By projecting these IR dots, you're able to get depth information as well. And so then they have an onboard, purpose-built, kind of ASIC computer to combine those depth feeds and get a really robust system overall. And so these cameras are actually really pretty good, but they still have their shortcomings. So how do we actually do this alignment? Let's walk through the process really quick. So we start off with a big feed like this. So this would be the camera looking out into the world, and you can see the truss right here, but there's also a lot of noise in the background, and all those extra points end up slowing us down a lot. The first thing we do is run it through some filtering APIs from the camera manufacturer itself. And so those are pretty good. They do some spatial smoothing or some temporal smoothing so that there's not as much jitteriness in the scene. They also reduce the number of points overall if there are multiple points in the same location, stuff like that. So that helps a little bit. Then the next big step we do is we filter down just to kind of a local area. So we remove points beyond a certain distance so we don't have to worry about them anymore. And then again, we downsample because having too dense of points just wastes time for us. And then what we want to do is the last big thing is this ground plane. So we're going to filter out that ground plane. And now we have really just what looks like a good old truss. You can see it's still missing some parts here. It's not perfect by any means, but we're finally able to align it really well to our template object. And so this is the template that we're using for this alignment. You'll notice it's kind of missing some of its components. That's because the template choice matters a lot. You want to pick a template that actually fits your data really closely. And so since we're kind of missing these top bars and we're missing these bottom bars, I'm using a template that also misses those. If we use one that has it, you can see it kind of gets messed up because it will find points of symmetry all across this object. But it'll still work a fair amount of the time, just not always. So choosing a proper template matters a lot. Also what matters a lot is speed. These point clouds are a lot more information than just using RGB sensors, and so we need to find efficient ways to solve these problems. So the traditional alignment algorithm we use is a big O of n squared, so it's a quadratic time algorithm. I found this paper which makes some really common sense trade-offs in order to get that down to linear time, big O of n. So that's, n squared is this red line shooting up into infinity, and then linear time is much, much faster than n squared time. So this actually sped up our algorithm by many factors of a couple of orders of magnitude, which added up to 30 seconds in practical application. So it gets us from 30 seconds of alignment down to 3 seconds of alignment, which is great. Finally, after we have a good alignment, we'll feed. So if we find a good alignment, we'll take that as our first guess for the next alignment, which means that once we find the truss, we do a really good job of holding on to it. So sometimes it takes us a couple iterations to find the truss, but once we get it, we're really good at keeping it. Okay, so there are challenges. This says, can you pass the salt? Waits for a while. I said, oh, I know, I'm developing a system to pass you arbitrary condiments. It's been 20 minutes. It'll save time in the long run. Okay, we're working on the long run time saving right now, and it takes a little bit to get there. So we're trying to pass arbitrary shapes, and these are some of the challenges associated with that. So the cameras aren't perfect. We end up getting these pretty poor point clouds. If I was to fill this in, these are all the bars that are actually missing from the point cloud, and some of them are pretty sketchy even though they're there. So the information's far from perfect, which makes alignment hard. This particular shape is also relatively difficult. There's a lot of symmetrical sides to it. If you rotate the truss sideways, it actually lines up pretty decently, especially depending on which bars happen to be missing on that iteration. So that poses a challenge. Also, the truss is symmetrical around its 3 rotations. And so when we do our alignment, we just get an arbitrary rotation. But then when we want to pick it up, we only want to pick it up from the closest side, not the farther side away. So we don't necessarily know which one is the closer side to us versus the farther side away, so we have to do some math to make sure we get the closer one. These are all just additional challenges with such a symmetrical shape. Additionally, the materials are kind of difficult. The point cloud cameras really don't like reflective materials, so the metal didn't work very well. We painted it. That made it a little bit better. We did some materials testing for what tapes we could wrap it in that would make it more robust. And even I played around with speckling the tape to give it more contrast for our stereoscopic alignment. And the speckling didn't really help that much, but the taping did help a lot. And we ran out of tape, so I bought some at Walmart, and then that's all the tape that we have right now. The tape's good. Okay, sometimes it can be pretty slow doing alignment, so that's why this filtering process going from a big point cloud like this down here really speed things up a lot. If you had to do this type of alignment in a very cluttered scene, that would be really challenging. A lot of the global registration, these algorithms are called registration algorithms. The global ones are usually meant for like high overlap scenes. They don't work well at picking a small object out of a large scene, so that's why filtering is so crucial. But we can do a good job filtering, so it's not necessarily the end of the world. And then finally, we don't have ID information anymore. Since we're finding the truss based on its intrinsic shape, if we were going to be in some in-space assembly mission where we need a specific truss in a specific location, we might have to, again, add some sort of 2D barcode onto the truss so that we know which one's which is kind of a benefit that we got intrinsically with the markers from last summer. So these are some of the challenges, but there are definitely lots of upsides to doing the intrinsic shape. And it works on full scale. So the full scale is a little bit difficult as well because we only really see the front of the truss. The point cloud very much falls off as you go further behind the truss and things are obscured. But we do get a lot of benefit from the larger bars. You have a pretty clean front X and kind of parts going off behind it. But the cameras still aren't great. I mean, just look at the ground plane. You can particularly tell on a computer, it's awfully bumpy, and we have all these kind of splash effects, which definitely shouldn't be here. This is just a flat bar, but it looks as if the bar kind of splashes off behind itself. So these pose challenges for registration, but it still works really pretty well, even on our full-scale model. So there's definitely a lot of promise here. Crucial to this whole process, you don't have to read all these graphs, but it's alignment parameters. There are many different parameters that are involved, and so just doing some quick testing to see which ones are going to be more promising than others was really critical. Of course, these are all in the XKCD style because we're inspired by that man. He was also an intern at NASA Langley and is rumored to have created one of the robots, which is downstairs. I should have put a picture of it here, but I don't know. Do you have any confirmation if he actually built this robot? No one does. No one does. Okay. Well, I'd like to believe. So one of the other parts of this summer that I worked on a lot outside of work, but then brought to the table here, was learning more about Linux, navigating a Linux shell much more quickly and efficiently. And so I've come away with a bunch of improvements for how I navigate a computer that I'm really, really excited about. It makes it so much faster, more beautiful, easier to use. And so I'm going to be hosting for all of our interns a using Linux more efficiently session tomorrow afternoon, on my last afternoon here. So I can't wait to show you guys some about Vim and configuring your terminal and Z shell and Oh My Z shell and AG and grep and all these things. So it's going to be great. Also Visual Studio Code. If you're not on it, get on it. Visual Studio Code is so good. It's really, really good. So this is an example of what my terminal looks like right now. This is the spaceship Discovery in my command line there. I have predictive commands which will guess what I'm going to type next, and I can just accept that. Have much more meaningful colors and get information, and the time it takes to run a command pops up. It didn't pop up there, but usually it does if it runs that way. So there's a lot you can do to make your terminal experience more fun. And this is my project running. Also, while I was here, I got the opportunity to tour many really incredible places around the center. And so this is the model shop where they make from scratch so many of the models that run in the numerous wind tunnels around NASA Langley. This is a large jet, the T1, and I was so excited. This man was telling me lots of great information about it, but I just couldn't help but hold it up over my head. He said the engines actually weigh more than the plane itself. So that's pretty interesting. This is the 14 by 22 wind tunnel. They have these enormous wooden propeller blades to get the wind moving up to Mach 1 inside such a large volume of space. That's pretty incredible. And then, okay, this is my last video. This is the vertical wind tunnel on the Air Force side of things. These are water droplets floating in air. And you really feel like an astronaut when you see this. I've never seen water just sitting in front of me like that, and it put a brimming smile on everyone's face. I was so impressed. This is what they actually use the wind tunnel for, spin testing. That's not a good situation for a plane, so they figure out how to prevent that, as well as using parachutes and whatnot to arrest a spin if aircrafts get into that position. Also, I finally got to go on the top of the gantry. It was a long time goal. My next mission is to actually cannonball in there, just like the Orion capsule, but NASA might have some things to say about that. But it's been an incredible summer. I really thank you all for working with me, supporting me, giving me so much throughout the course of the summer. Derek, thank you for your constant help as we get this robotic arm up and running. And thank you too, Danette. This has been a really incredible time. So thanks, everyone. Yeah.
How did you get to the top of the gantry?
So some of you may know I love the sport Ultimate Frisbee. I play Ultimate about 5 nights a week, most weeks. And some of the people I play with are contractors here. And so one of them has a son who's also interning here. And he was getting him all the inside tours for places around the center because he was in all of those buildings repairing stuff. And so I and his son got many a private tour around many a private thing around here. So that was my inside scoop. Yeah, I'm sorry it's not more reproducible. Yeah, I will say I think the one other area of research that could be really beneficial here would be kind of a custom marker built into the truss. That would kind of give you both the benefit of all the things that are great about the markers, which is their high reliability, how easy it is to find them, while also avoiding the parasitic mass debacle. So kind of, I imagine these markers to look a little bit like the side of a die, like a dice, where you have little dots kind of milled out of the metal. And I think that would actually work out as a pretty good kind of best of both worlds between the two solutions we've examined so far. But it would also be a pretty significant engineering challenge to develop an entire marker system from scratch.
What if I had 1,000 trusses?
Yeah, well, so you'd have to think about how big the markers would have to be. I think it's feasible because small enough markers can have much diversity. But yeah, you'd have to really engineer it from scratch. Yeah.
So I'll ask you a question about the parasitic mass of the marker, so follow on to this question.
Mm-hmm.
If I did have 1,000 trusses, and as you stated, I'm using autonomous in-space assembly to assemble an optical bench of mirrors.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when I'm on the ground before launch, I've assembled this giant mirror. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The mirrors have been polished to precision, and so it needs to go back together in space exactly like it was assembled on Earth. Do you think that solution is markers only, point cloud only, some combination, passive, active markers? What are your thoughts on what that solution space looks like?
Yeah, well, I think an ideal solution would probably be some sort of custom marker. Just because markers have such a great benefit. They're easy to pick out of a crowd. You don't get very many false positive or false negatives. They're really reliable. And they have ID information built into them. So I really like all of their attributes there. It would just be a large engineering challenge. You might also think about some sort of active markers. If you could have an IR light attached to one of your trusses, that would make it really easily identifiable. And then you could pick things out that way and have the lights shine at different times, something like that potentially could be.
So, yeah, what about when you get big swings between light and dark, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to calibrate cameras
Yeah.
for those big swings. So is that a solution that would work if a regular CV solution was struggling?
Yeah, particularly. So lighting conditions are very difficult in space, and you might have a lot of instances where if you're looking for black-white contrast, the space is full of black-white contrast. So having an active IR light is a pretty good workaround for that. It might be much more robust than a passive sensor, passive marker.
So you talked about being able to find objects in cluttered environments.
Mm-hmm.
So what if that clutter or whatever's in the background is known to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, you know, I'm on a planetary surface or I'm in front of some infrastructure and I know what it looks like. How
Mm-hmm.
capable are the algorithms then if you have some knowledge about what the background is?
Very capable, because then it essentially just becomes another filtering problem. So if you know where things are generally, or at least where not to look, then you can filter out those parts of the scene, and then point cloud stuff works really well. It just gets a little touchy, and especially if you're trying to find a point cloud that's so broken up already, then if you have a lot of noise in the scene, sometimes you can get flukes that kind of ruin your results.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're talking about how the templates are optimal. Can you explain a little about what a template actually is and why you can't have one that is, you know, something that you know what it's going to look like?
Yeah, so the key idea is that you want to have a template which looks as close as possible to the data that you're actually getting from your scene. So like in the large truss example, all you really saw was the front half of the model of the truss, and so we ended up using a template that was only the front half of the truss. Because if we tried to use one that was the full truss, we would see that, 70% of it, you know, has no corresponding points, and so then it's not a very good fit. But if we match our model to our data, we get much better results because we have a much higher percentage of inlier points, which really helps. Yeah, Derek?
Are these templates manually selected? So how do you do the alignment?
Yeah, so you would probably look at your scene and see what kind of shape you're getting generally. It doesn't have to be crazy exact. I only ever used 3 different templates, kind of a full one that was missing the top bars, and then a half. So that's the granularity that you need, but it kind of matches your scene that way. Yeah, cool.
Do you foresee, or do you foresee a way where you can automate that with the template other than manually?
It's a good question. I don't think it will be super necessary to do that, just because the scene that you're working in will probably be relatively consistent. The large truss will almost always need that same template. And I think it would be relatively hard to automate that, just because you'd be getting bad results, and then maybe you could just try a different template and see if you get better results. That could work. So it seems feasible, but we don't need it right now.
Exploring the scene so you know what that the full template will work.
Yeah, so I think this is a really promising approach, actually. You could move your camera around in the scene and then get a lot of information about your entire scene to create one global, 3D map of it. And then from that 3D map, you could do registration there. So that would give you much cleaner data, hopefully, if you're able to move your camera around in a controlled way. So I like that idea.
If you could stay another month, where would you focus your time?
If I could stay another month, there's a lot of things I would like to do. It's a lot of tuning and thinking about what do we do if we get slightly erroneous data. One thing that we struggle with right now is the fitness function. So we don't exactly know how good the alignment worked after we do each iteration of it. So sometimes we'll do the alignment and it'll say this is 95% fit, but then it's in a trash can on the side of the room. So I would like to do some work on improving their fitness function from scratch, and or finding a way to do some smoothing so that we see, okay, if we get 5 alignments in the same position, we know that's a good position, because alignments we get that are bad are scattered all around. They're never going to be 2 of the same one. So I think there could be some good just meta work on the fitness functions and knowing when we have a really good pose. Yeah. Which I was just talking to Derek about this morning. Yeah.
Well, let's thank Kastan one more time.
Okay. Thank you.
And Peyton, nice video.
Yeah, great video, Peyton.